Hi, everyone. Welcome to All Things Betting, an NBA podcast. I'm your host, Monique, also known as Parlay Queen. This is episode number 2. And if you're new here, I want to let you in on what I'm going to be forecasting and what to look out for in this podcast. Now, I want to highlight a few of the games throughout the week that are marquee matchups. Those teams that might be playing for a little bit more, have that little extra incentive later on down the season. So, of course, playoff seeding, I think, is going to be extremely important. But early on in the season, trying to focus on those teams that may be either overrepresented in the market or underrepresented. That will lead me into a few of the teams that I'm going to talk about today in terms of there being an overreaction to either a great start, a poor start, or for players not necessarily getting out to the best of beginnings or perhaps having some struggles. So let's get right into it. Let's talk about 3 games on Wednesday and Thursday that stand out this week. And I think they could go and help you out throughout some of your not only daily betting, but your fantasy as well. So first things first, we're going to talk about the Celtics at Pacers. Now, another thing to point out as well that I think is extremely important, I'm recording this earlier on in the week. So this is being recorded on Sunday. I do have the Pacers 76ers matchup going on right now, 2 minutes left in the fourth. So I'll tell you a little bit about that live as things are happening. But I feel like with my notes and a lot of the information, stats wise, I'm going to provide you, of course, not necessarily factoring in, but if it is extremely irrelevant or apparent moving on, I will tell you that. Tyrese Haliburton, 30 minutes thus far in this matchup, 2 for 6 from 3. I know they got him involved early on. He has 16 points for the game. The first couple plays really designed to see him having that success. Now, why is this important? Well, he struggled. He has struggled in the first 2 games to start this season and game number 3 against the 76ers as well. So his struggles from beyond the arc, 0 for 7 last game. In that matchup, he was also held scoreless throughout 26 minutes. He is 1 for 16 on the season from beyond the arc. Now, if we factor in those 2 made threes, again, still focusing on the fact that he is struggling from deep. Now, it is not only him, it's team as a whole. 3 for 30 from deep versus the Knicks and 29% from 3. Those were struggles that started in the opener, of course, reared up again against the New York Knicks. Looking at them against the Celtics, though, I like to focus in on the head-to-head matchup. Now, there is obviously a massive discrepancy and a massive difference between regular season and postseason. So these numbers I'm going to give you are regular season and the last 2 head-to-head matchups. So we saw a 129-124 Celtics victory. What I do take big out of this matchup were the 108 attempts from Indiana and 19 offensive rebounds. Indiana, a team that we know like to push the pace. They're a team that led the association in terms of points per game. And this is a team that had 19 offensive rebounds. That, to me, is a team that is able to get out in transition and get those second chance opportunities that more often than not are going to lead to points. So let's talk a little bit about why that game is interesting and why I think game 2 is also interesting when these 2 teams met up. We saw 133-131 Pacers victory. We saw 91 and 90 shot attempts, so very, very even between these 2 teams. No Jason Tatum in the matchup. That is really, really important. 40 attempts from beyond the arc from Indiana. Now, pace of play is something I think that we're going to really be honing in on for this team in particular, and extra motivation. Where we'll start things off, where we saw the Celtics sweep the Pacers in the Eastern Conference Finals. They 4-0'd them. First game, really close. Last game, back and forth, close as well, but nonetheless, a sweep. Pace of play. Let's go back to pace of play and hone in on that in particular. Why is this extremely important? Well, the Pacers are a team that like to play fast. I'm going to pull up some notes and share some information that I think could really be beneficial, not only for you wagering wise, but just some information I think could go a long way in terms of expectations. So let me share with you my screen where pace of play comes into the equation. So this is a website that I like to use a lot. It's called StatMuse, where you can ask it a bunch of questions across sports in general. And they give you some really, really poignant information geared specifically to your question. So I asked it about the NBA pace of play by team in the 2023-2024 season. So here we have the Wizards number 1, the Pacers number 2. We see the points per game, which I think is interesting, the field goal attempts, the field goal percentage, and the pace number, which of course is what I'm honing in on right here. So we see the Pacers here, and then all the way towards the bottom, we see the Celtics 23rd. So closing that for a little bit and getting back into my notes. So 104 possessions per average from Indiana. The Celtics, we talked about playing at a much slower pace. What is the equalizer? So, of course, the fact that the Celtics not only are super, super efficient and effective, the fact that they're able to get it done beyond the arc, shoot extremely well from the floor. They shot 48.4%. They led the league in three-point percentage and second in points per game at 127. That is the equalizer. This is a team that likes to set up on defense. The Pacers are a team that like to get out in transition, as mentioned. But the fact that they're this accurate, well, that speaks for itself. What do I like in this matchup? Well, I like two things. First things first, talked about the pace, that being relevant. I love the over for this matchup. Given the Pacers' recent struggles, potential recency with the postseason outcome, them being lower scoring games in the postseason, I do think all of this is going to get taken into the equation, and I think we'll see a lower than expected under-over total for this matchup. My guess is around 228.5 would be the number that we will see. What do I think we would see if the Pacers were to have gotten out to a better start this year? Likewise with Haliburton, probably closer to 234, maybe even 236. So I do really like the over. I think 234 would be a little bit too high. So I'm hoping that we see that number much, much lower. But I'd say anywhere under 233 and under would be me taking the over for this matchup. Now, if it is a lot lower than perhaps that number in particular, you might want to be a little bit ambitious and take an alternate total, looking for maybe plus 125, plus 150. But either way, I do feel like this is going to be a game where we see both teams having that success on the offensive end. So let's talk about Pascal Siakam. Talked about Haliburton having some struggles. When we think of Pascal Siakam, we certainly do not think of him recording a lot of assists. Now, I initially looked at this and thought, okay, him under the assist total. And then I saw what number he was for the 76ers matchup, and looking at the two games we do see in the regular season already this year. Under over total was 3.5 at plus 105. So let me once again share my screen with you for Pascal. Of course, when we think of Siakam, we think about a player that's more often than not fed the ball and given a great opportunity to get it done. He's great inside the paint. And of course, we see the assist numbers stand out. Only twice last season did he have 10 or more assists. We usually see him in that 0 to 4 assist range. Now, scrolling down to the bottom, we see the playoffs. We see the assist total against Boston. We saw 2 games with 6 and 7. We see minutes played right here, a big number of minutes played. That is usually indicative of Siakam. He's on the floor a ton. And those are things that stand out to me from last season. Now, if we're looking at this year, they have, of course, only these 2 games because we're talking about the 76ers game happening right now. We see minutes played 23 for the most recent game against the Knicks. We see 31. Field goal attempts, okay. But what stands out to me is the assists. We saw 9 assists in game number 1. We see a really, really good plus minus. And of course, game 2 wasn't particularly close. And they really struggled from beyond the arc. So I'm going to close that for a little bit and pull that up momentarily. But he had that team high 9 assists through 32 minutes of game time, the number being well above his average of assists, only averaged 3.7 last year. The Pacers have struggled from 3. I would expect the Celtics game plan to be placing much more of an emphasis on having the Pacers beat you from beyond the arc. I know how much the Pacers have struggled. Likewise with everyone on the Celtics. They have not been able to get those shots. They've had some good looks. They just have not fallen. Pascal's a player that likes to get inside the paint. He can kick the ball out a lot to players on the perimeter. I do feel like there's going to be a big game plan and emphasis, once again, getting Tyrese involved. And I think a lot of that can really revolve around Pascal Siakam. I like that we're getting plus money on him to go over that 3.5 assists total. I feel like we might even get a better number come their matchup against the Celtics. And when I do forecast it to be higher scoring, I think that can go a pretty long way. Let's wrap things up for that game and switch over to the Pelicans and Warriors. Both teams 2-0 at the time of making this. We see the Warriors putting up 140 and 127 points against 2 teams with not high expectations on the season in the Jazz and Trailblazers. We also saw big minutes out of the reserves. The Pelicans, also 2-0, 123 points in their opener without Zion Williamson. That stands out. Game 2, no DeJounte Murray, had that come from behind win versus the Blazers. My big question mark and what I really want to focus in on for the Pelicans, especially for the near future, is where are they going to generate their offense? That is a huge, huge question mark. Head-to-head between the Pelicans and Warriors, last time these 2 teams met up, we saw McCollum with 8 made threes, Trey Murphy with 6, and this team still only put up 114. That was thanks to a 45-point second quarter. Did not have a ton of offensive success. Again, I really like the under for this matchup. Now, the Warriors, we haven't seen all that many minutes out of their starters. From what I have seen, have not been all that impressed. In terms of what I think the under-over is going to be for this matchup, I would say 221.5. Maybe I'm a little bit high on that number. Maybe it is closer to 219.5. Either way, I really like the under. When you factor in someone like a DeJounte Murray out for an extended period of time with the broken hand, that I think is going to cause some issues in terms of the flow. He is a player that got a lot of touches in the game, and I think that's something to really consider. Of course, we had no Zion. His health is always a question for the Pels. Bet the under in here and hope for a number somewhere close to 220 or 221. Let's wrap things up with the Bucks at Grizzlies. I am really, really looking forward to seeing these 2 teams play. The Grizzlies last year, a complete write-off without Ja Morant. And the Bucks, they were not able to stay healthy, and that was their detriment. Milwaukee, though, interesting through those 2 games thus far. They looked really good in the season opener. And second game against the Bulls, they struggled defensively. The Bulls were able to go on a nice run to put things away late and solidify the win. The big takeaway for them, I would say, was the Bulls scoring 21 three-pointers. That is shocking. Not only because it is the Chicago Bulls, but the fact that that was the second most in a game since hitting a franchise record 25 in 2021. Now looking at Giannis' stats, without Chris Middleton, this is something I think is going to be a huge focal point of the Bucks and a huge, perhaps Achilles heel for them. Of course, when you take a player like Chris Middleton and Giannis Antetokounmpo, there are so many things that you can't quantify. The fact that Middleton is going to get a lot of attention, likewise with Giannis, you have the kick out, you have the pick and roll, you have so many opportunities to put up big numbers when these two teams are, or these two players are in the game together. Giannis' stats without Middleton, 28.9 points per game on just shy of 58% shooting. This year, he's put up 38 and 25 points. That, I think, is pretty telling. Going away from him a little bit and focusing in on other players in this matchup, I always like to focus in on teams that I think and players I think are going to have success early on. Now, these are two of the top 5 first quarter scoring teams last season. 31.3 for Boston, 29.7 Milwaukee. These are teams that like to get out to a quick start and have success doing so. This is similar for the first half as well, at 61.9 for Boston and 59.2 for Milwaukee. So, I talked about liking teams that get out to good starts because this gives you an opportunity to have teams that get out to good starts, perhaps don't have the best of second quarters or third quarters, and because they've scored so many early on, that ends up really putting you in a good situation to potentially cash out your wager if you're interested in that, betting the over, or just setting yourself up to not necessarily needing 30 or 40 points in a quarter to go over your total. So let's pull up some numbers and take a look at some players that have had some success early on in games season long. So here is a look at first quarter scoring. So these are, again, on StatMuse, players that have scored the most first quarter points on average last season. So this is an average number. Joel Embiid at 11.4. What I want to focus in on, of course, Jaylen Brown, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Jason Tatum. These are players that like to get out to good starts. Of course, scrolling down a little bit further, those are, I think, the ones that really do stand out. Of course, Kristaps Porzingis, that's a key player that's going to be out of this matchup for Boston. But nonetheless, you see a lot of familiar faces and familiar names in terms of getting out to a good start. So, got Jaylen Brown in the top 10, Giannis at 12th, Tatum at 15th, Lillard at 17th in the first quarter. Now, if we go a little bit further and look at the first half, we have Tatum 3rd at 15.1, and we have Giannis 5th, Jaylen 13th. These are players that we know are going to have the ball in their hands early on in the games. We're looking at the starters logging big minutes, pending, of course, foul trouble. And I think this is going to go a long way in terms of honing in on players that are going to have that early success and teams that are going to do that as well. So for the Bucks and Grizzlies, what I really do like for this matchup, of course, is a combined first half over for these two teams. I think taking these two teams to get out to an early start, whether it be first quarter, whether it be first half, I think all of that is going to be pretty interesting and hopefully beneficial for you. So that is just a little bit about what I'm going to be targeting for these first 3 matchups. Hopefully some notes, hopefully some information that can go a very long way for you in terms of cashing in on some winners. Thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you've enjoyed this, and I hope that you tune in for episode number 3. Take care and good luck.